We continue our study of the Gospel of John together, and we've been using as our theme, who is this Jesus? And as we go through the Gospel of John, we're trying to answer that question, who is this Jesus? Today, he is the King of the Jews, taken from John chapter 18, verse 28 through chapter 19, verse 15. Doing the right thing is often very hard to do. Peers make fun of you when you're not joining in with them to do something that's wrong. You feel pressure to give in. Will you do what's right, or will you go with the crowd? Sometimes you may be threatened if you don't do the wrong thing. Gangs exert that kind of pressure and power over their members. In the movie Courageous, a man is being considered for promotion at work. The boss calls him into the office and says that he will give him a trial run as supervisor. But there is a catch. When the delivery of boxes is made to the factory, he is to write down one less box than actually comes in. The boss asks if he is a team player. Now, this guy is a Christian, and he is given until the next day to think about his decision. If you haven't seen the movie, you'll have to watch it to find out what the man decides to do. I don't want to spoil it for you. But all people, including Christians, have to wrestle just about every day with whether or not they will do the right thing in a given situation. Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, who is not a believer, will be put in such a situation regarding Jesus. Who is this Jesus? He is the King of the Jews. Turn with me to John chapter 18. And we will look at verses 28 through 32 first, where we will find that they took Jesus before Pilate. Verses 28 through 32 of John chapter 18. Then they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium, and it was early morning. But they themselves did not go into the praetorium, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. Pilate then went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered and said to him, "If he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you." Then Pilate said to them, "You take him and judge him according to your law." Therefore the Jews said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death," that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying by what death he would die. Now the religious rulers take Jesus to Pilate. And if you remember that they've already given Jesus two kangaroo courts, one before Annas the high priest, and the second in front of Caiaphas the high priest. They were chumping up charges against Jesus. They really had no basis for doing anything against him other than the fact that they hated him. They saw Jesus as a threat. And so now that they have finished with their religious trial, they realize that legally they can't condemn him to death. Only Rome could do that. So now they want to go before Pilate, the Roman governor, and basically all they want from Pilate is for him to rubber stamp Jesus' death sentence. They're not interested in anything else. They just want Pilate to play ball, to go along with them and give them what they want. But notice, we're told that this is taking place early in the morning. That's already unfair treatment of Jesus. First of all, he was tried in the religious court in the middle of the night, which was illegal. They were trying to carry this quickly, make this happen before the crowds got aware of what was going on, because a lot of people, they believed in Jesus. They at least believed what they saw. You have to think back to Palm Sunday when the people are lining the street saying, Hosanna. So there were a lot of people that may have been in Jesus' corner. They bring Jesus to Pilate, but they don't enter into the praetorium, which is the residence where Pilate lived. Now, according to Jewish law, you don't go into the home of a Gentile. And so they will not go into the praetorium. They will not go into Pilate's dwelling place because it is Passover. They don't want to defile themselves during Passover because then they wouldn't be able to celebrate Passover. But think about this. They are willing to railroad Jesus and have him killed. Doesn't that defile them? But they are so much into the outward appearance that they will not go into Pilate's home to bring accusation against Jesus. So Pilate has to come out to them. And he says, what is the charge against this man? What is your accusation? And notice they don't give him a direct answer. They say to Pilate, if he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you. If he's not a criminal, why would we bring him to you? He has to be a criminal. Why are you worried about the charges? Now, that's some kind of way to speak to the Roman governor, isn't it? But they feel that they have him over the barrel, and all they want is for him to cooperate. They didn't have a legitimate charge against him. So Pilate says, in turn, judge this man by your Jewish law. Why are you involving me? I don't have anything to do with this. But they say, we're not allowed to put anybody to death. And as I read this, I don't know about you, but when I read the Bible, I read the Bible. And I think in terms of, so what is this really saying? And what's between the lines? They say it's not lawful for us to put anyone to death. But what's stopping them from killing Jesus? Right? They've stoned other people. What is stopping them from killing Jesus? Well, I think that there's some fear factor here because of the people that had been following Jesus. Jesus is popular. And if they come against Jesus, these are the religious rulers now, they're concerned that this might have a backlash on them. And so they don't want to get their hands dirty. So they wanted to be able to point to Rome. Rome killed him. It wasn't us, it was Rome. But at the same time, they wanted to have a spectacle to snuff this movement out. And so it was necessary for them to get Rome to kill Jesus, to kill him by crucifixion, so that everybody would see, and so that his disciples would disappear. And this whole mess, this whole problem would be solved by one move. And I believe they also wanted a crucifixion because they know that it is a curse for anyone to hang on a tree. Galatians 3:13 says, cursed is he who is hanged on a tree, which comes from Deuteronomy 21:23. And so you see what's going on here? They want to get rid of Jesus, and believe me, in a fit of rage, they would have tried to kill him. But they are calculating how can they do this so that their hands don't get dirty, so that they get what they want, so that this movement is snuffed out. Because after all, we're talking about the chief priests. Those are the Sadducees. The Sadducees were in cooperation with Rome. After all, how did you become a high priest? You could buy the office from Rome. which means you played ball with Rome. Now, how does Jesus see this? Verse 32, that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying by what death he would die. All this had to come to pass because Jesus has already said that he was going to be crucified. He says, if I be lifted up from the earth, and he was talking about crucifixion, I'll draw all men to me. So we have here the religious rulers bring Jesus to Pilate. But next we see that Pilate asked Jesus if he is king. Verses 33 through 38. Then Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus, and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered him, "Are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom was of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." Pilate therefore said to him, "Are you a king then?" Jesus answered, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, "I find no fault in him at all." What's going on? Pilate goes in to question Jesus, and he says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" This was a charge that the Jews were using to get Pilate to do what they wanted him to do. Well, you see, Rome doesn't tolerate other kings. They don't tolerate other political figures who want to replace or even be on the same footing as the Caesar. And so they feel that if they make this charge to Pilate, he can't ignore it. See, this is a political charge, not the religious charge. Now, we know that the religious leaders are accusing Jesus of blasphemy. That's a religious charge. But now they present a political charge. He's making himself king. Well, if he's making himself king, that results in rebellion. So Jesus asked Pilate his reason for asking this question. Are you speaking for yourself? Do you want to know if I'm king for your own reason? Or has somebody put something to your ears and it's causing you to ask me this question? What is your reason for asking me this question? And notice how Pilate responds. Am I a Jew? Do I care about such things as this? I mean, I could care less if you could call yourself king of the Jews. You have no impact in my life. Then he says, your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. They sold you out. Don't be asking me about where I heard this from. They sold you out. So what is it that you've done? I don't believe this thing about you being king of the Jews. What is your real crime? Why are they out to get you? And that's what Pilate is asking. Jesus says in verse 36, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now, my kingdom is not from here. Pilate, who is a fairly astute politician, says, aha, so you are a king. I mean, who has a kingdom? A king has a kingdom, right? So Jesus is speaking about his kingdom. Therefore, Jesus is saying that he is king. And Pilate catches that. Nothing gets by this guy. What he didn't catch was that Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. Because if my kingdom was of this world, you couldn't touch me. And the Jews would not have been able to deliver me before you, because my servants would have fought to defend me. Not that he needed that. Jesus, all he had to do was speak, and they would drop dead anyway. But he's saying, my kingdom is not in this domain. But I didn't catch this until just reading it a few moments ago. The end of verse 36. But now my kingdom is not from here. It will be later. He's going to reign on this earth for 1,000 years, isn't he? On the throne of David. Amen. But I didn't see that until, but now my kingdom is not from here. Right now it's not of this world. But one day I'm coming back as king. And every knee will bow. And every tongue will confess. And Jesus says, you rightly say that I am a king. Pilate, I have to give it to you. You figured it out. I really am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world. Now, some of you may have questioned why, for Scripture, we read a Christmas passage. Mark chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. Maybe you see the tie-in now. Because the wise men came to Jerusalem, and what did they ask Herod? Where is he who is born King of the Jews? Now that is a deep statement. I've shared this before. You are born a prince. You're not born a king. Except for Jesus. Where is he who is born, who's already king of the Jews? Jesus says, that's why I came into this world. I came to be king of the Jews. But I came so that I might bear witness to the truth of what my Father says, the truth of God's word. And so here's Pilate. Again, nothing gets by this guy. What is truth? He is trying to just poo-poo what Jesus is saying. He's saying, what are you talking about when it comes to truth? Before I go on, let me go back to Matthew chapter 2. Verse 3 says that Herod was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Troubled at hearing that there was someone born king of the Jews. Now, Herod fancied himself as king of the Jews. That's what he called himself. He wasn't even Jewish himself, but he called himself king of the Jews. And we know that Herod had a pride issue. He even killed members of his own family to try to keep his power. But all Jerusalem was troubled with Herod. You see, when someone proclaims that they are king of the Jews, the religious and the political leaders get upset. Why? Because the king of the Jews threatens their power base. Herod would be threatened because he thought he was king of the Jews. But the religious rulers will also be threatened because the king of the Jews would mean that that's the end of their gravy train. And so they were upset. Now, fast forward 33 years later, Jesus is king of the Jews. And who's upset with him? The religious leaders. They can't stand to hear him be called the King of the Jews. Well, Jesus says, I've come to bear witness to the truth, and Pilate says, what is truth? Now, is that a philosophical question? You know, the philosophers are always trying to determine what is truth? What is truth? Well, they can't come up with any answers. You know why? Because the philosophers don't believe in absolutes. If you don't believe in absolutes, then you can't believe in truth. Because what's true for you may not be true for me. So how can we really know what is true? See, that's a philosophical way of looking at it. But there's also another way to look at it, and maybe Pilate was thinking about it from this perspective, and that is a practical position. What is practical? You know, for those who look at truth from a practical position, they say truth is in the eye of those who have the power. Right? What is truth? I'm sure you remember growing up, you would disagree with your mother or your father, and you were always in danger of a backhand. So you would say, well, my teacher said so and so. I don't care what your teacher said. I said, right? But the teacher has more education than you. Slap. And you quickly found out that truth was in the hand of the one who had the power. Right? Amen. I remember growing up, my father would say, when I'm right, I'm right. And when I'm wrong, I'm right. You understand that, don't you? As a child, I could never be right. Dad was always right because he had the power. He had the ability to determine what was true. You know, some kids grow up thinking that it's okay to shoplift because those who have power in their lives tell them it's okay. You can be so swayed into thinking wrong because those who have power over you tell you what truth is. That's a practical way of looking at truth. But there's a third way. Truth is a person. John 14:6 makes that clear. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. Truth is a person who has all power. Truth is a person, and it is absolute. It is not shaky. It is not flaky. It is not this way today and this way tomorrow. You look to Jesus and you will know the truth. So then Pilate says, I got to tell you, you religious rulers, I find no fault in him at all. You know, he's making my head swim, but he hasn't done anything that's worthy of death. He is an innocent man, and he is no threat to Rome. So what happens next? Pilate offers a compromise. Look at verses 39 and 40. This is how you know that he is a consummate politician. But you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover. Do you therefore want me to release to you the King of the Jews? Then they all cried again, saying, not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber. Or better translated, he was an insurrectionist. History says that he led a rebellion. He even killed some Romans. This was a guy who was a troublemaker. But Pilate is offering a compromise. He says, you know, it is customary for me to release a prisoner to you at Passover. And he doesn't ask them who they want. He makes a suggestion. Do you want me to release? And he's speaking to the crowd, not to the religious rulers, because he knows they don't want Jesus released. They want Jesus dead. So he's speaking to the crowd. He said, do you want me to release the King of the Jews? And maybe he uses that in one way, he's mocking Jesus, but in another way, he may be trying to sway the crowd, because if the crowd believed that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is the King, that maybe they will rally around and support Jesus. You know, sometimes we say things hoping that people will be motivated to see things the way that we see it. So Pilate is trying to work the crowd, but they shout for the release of Barabbas. Matthew 27:20 says that this was instigated by the priests. They were in the crowd. They're saying, say Barabbas, say Barabbas. You know, they know how to work a crowd too. And maybe you've been to a sporting event and you're for one team and there are people for the other team, and you know how you try to shout each other down and you want to work the crowd. Let's go Mets. Of course, I'm a Mets fan. Oh, it sounds beautiful. It sounds beautiful. That Yankees shirt is ugly. So, and you get into the battle, but you try to reach the neutral people, those who haven't made up their mind in either direction, and you want to work them. You want to get them to support your position. Pilate is trying to do that. He's trying to get the people to say, yeah, let's release Jesus. But the chief priests, they're working the crowd too. And they are stirring up the people saying, give us Barabbas, give us Barabbas. And so Pilate's compromise doesn't work. You see, Pilate is a man who is struggling with trying to do the right thing. He's trying to do the right thing. And you and I know how the story turns out. He doesn't do the right thing. Why does this happen? Well, the final chapter in this story is that Jesus is condemned. Chapter 19, beginning at verse 1. So then Pilate took Jesus and scourged him. And the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put on him a purple robe. Then they said, Hail, King of the Jews! And they struck him with their hands. Pilate then went out again and said to them, Behold, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him. Then Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said to them, Behold the man. Therefore, when the chief priests and officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Crucify him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, You take him and crucify him, for I find no fault in him. The Jews answered, We have a law, and according to our law, he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God. Therefore, when Pilate heard that saying, he was the more afraid, and went in again into the praetorium and said to Jesus, Where are you from? But Jesus gave him no answer. Then Pilate said to him, Are you not speaking to me? Do you not know that I have power to crucify you and power to release you? Jesus answered, You can have no power at all against me unless it had been given you from above. Let's get things straight. Therefore, the one who delivered me to you has the greater sin. From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, If you let this man go, you are not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar. When Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Jesus out and sat down in the judgment seat in the place that is called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the preparation day of the Passover, and about the 6th hour or noon. And he said to the Jews, Behold your king. But they cried out, Away with him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, Shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." Jesus is scourged, which means he is whipped to within an inch of his life. His back is raw, dripping with blood. Then Jesus is mocked. The soldiers put a crown of thorns on his head. And to make this charade even worse, they put on him a purple robe, purple being the color of royalty. And then they give fake reverence to him. "Hail, King of the Jews," as they slapped him. Now, this is Pilate's responsibility. Pilate knows that Jesus is innocent of the charges that the religious leaders have brought before him. He goes back out to the crowd and he says, "I'm bringing him out so that you will know that I find no fault in him. I've done what I could to examine this man. He's innocent." If Jesus is innocent and Pilate believes that, why does he do these things to Jesus? If Jesus is innocent, why does he have him scourged? If Jesus is innocent, why does he allow this mockery to be made of Jesus? Even though he didn't tell the soldiers to do these things, he could have stopped them, but he didn't. That's because Pilate doesn't know what truth is. Jesus is brought back before the crowd in this mock kingly garb, and Pilate says, "Behold the man. Look at him." And I think that he's saying, "Look at your harmless king. This man can't do anything. Why should he be put to death? He is no threat." But the priests shout for his crucifixion. And Pilate in anger says, "You crucify him." But see, now they know they got him. Because they cannot pull off the crucifixion. Only a Roman authority can do that. Pilate is trying to get out of this mess. But the priests pull out another ace. They say, according to Jewish law, he must die because he made himself the Son of God. Now, pause for a minute. What did they just say? He made himself the Son of God. That means they understood what Jesus had been teaching all along. They knew what Jesus was saying. They just refused to believe it. But when Pilate hears those words, "He made himself the Son of God," Pilate trembles even more. Now, Matthew 27:19 tells us that his wife warned him about her dream. Don't mess with this just man. He is a just man. He hasn't done anything wrong. You better leave this man alone. But I think that Pilate is also trembling because could it be that he really is the Son of God? And the reason I say that is because emperor worship was going on these days. You know that the Caesars claimed to be God. They were God on earth. Kings who are gods on earth. If this guy truly is a king, could it be that he is God on earth? After all, he did say that his kingdom is not of this world. And my wife already told me she had a nightmare about this man and that I should leave him alone. Pilate doesn't know the truth. He doesn't know what to think about this. And so what does he do? He runs back inside and he asks Jesus, "Where are you from? Come on, help me out. I mean, are you from up there? Where did you come from?" Jesus says nothing. Then Pilate gets on his high horse. Don't you know that I have the authority, I have the power to crucify you? I have the power to release you? Jesus said, you don't have any power. You can't do a thing unless God gives you the power to do it. You have no power over me. Power comes from above. And my betrayer has a greater sin. But you know what Jesus is saying? He's saying to Pilate, but you're not off the hook. Notice it says, my betrayer has the greater sin, which means Pilate still has sin himself. What is Pilate's sin? Right now, it's the sin of not doing the right thing. But Pilate seeks to free Jesus. But the Jews put Pilate in another bind, and they throw out their final ace, their final trump card. They say, you know, if you try to free Jesus, that's an act against Caesar. You can't do that because this man has proclaimed himself king, and if you release him, then you are acting against Caesar. You're no friend of Caesar. Oh, and by the way, we're going to let Caesar know about it. Somebody's going to go back and tell Caesar what you're doing down here. So they call for Jesus' crucifixion. But what is really sad is how this ends. Verse 15. They cried out, away with him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, shall I crucify your king? His last-ditch effort to try to reach these people. The chief priests answered, we have no king but Caesar. They don't like Caesar. But when it's convenient, they will say, he's the only king that we have. Now, as religious leaders, what about God the Father? For you see, in the nation Israel, God is king. That's called a theocracy. God is their king. Doesn't matter that David or Solomon or whoever is on the throne, the true king is always God. And they don't even give God his credit. We have no king but Caesar, which shows how lost they are. But Pilate caves in. Pilate gives them what they want. So what is the point of this message? Not looking at it from Pilate's perspective of where he just didn't do right. He knew what was right to do, but he just didn't muscle up and do it. The real question is Jesus your king? Is Jesus your king? You have broken God's law and done your own thing. You have not received Jesus as your king. The devil or your sinful desires have been your king. You are a slave to your king, but Jesus will free you. If you have never trusted Jesus Christ as your Savior, I encourage you to trust him today. Receive him as your king. For those who are believers, are you living like Jesus is your king? Do others know that he is your king? When you're tempted not to do the right thing, do you remember that you are a child of the king? Do you realize that obeying your king proves that he is your king? Begin every day this week by saying that you want Jesus to be king in everything that day. You want him to be king at home. You want him to be king at work, at school, when you shop, as you drive. You want him to be king in everything. Is he your king? Yes, if you're believing Jesus Christ, he's already king, but are you living like he's your king? Let's do that this week. Let's pray together.